Hello again. It's Teleologic Jones. Just want to, went to all the trouble of making this drawing, so I just wanted to clarify again some things that were in the previous video, at least the last one that was a clarification of the previous one. I'm really more just fleshing out some themes that I glossed over because it would have been kind of burdensome at the time. And just re-listening, it just seemed like maybe there was something that could be misconstrued. I wish I had a 3D model of this. I do not. If I had a 3D model, I could pivot it around and show you some things here, but I think we can... oh, just a sec. Let's see if I can draw one while we're chatting here. So I just wanted to clarify something. I had some things I'd been saying about this, that I said that this arc was the true motion. Well, these are just some issues around philosophy of mathematics and philosophy of science that need to be stated more clearly than I concisely. I mean, I could say them the way I did with this groundwork in place, but this groundwork is now being laid after the fact. So anyway, the first thing here is our representation is a view that no person could have except that that person was also moving along with the vehicle. And even then it couldn't. Like you'd have to actually be spot on looking, following this arc, but then that would distort everything around you. So there's no way for a person to see reality the way that we draft things. We draft as if there were absolute space, which is interesting. And the same thing with Cartesian graphings, not just drafting for architecture and whatever. We're assuming absolute space. Now that space may be very complicated in terms of its interrelationships. You can actually take 3D space, and that's just a minimum number of dimensions. You can have more dimensions. It just means you're quantifying things differently. It's not, you can have as many as you want. Your system is normally going to be cumbersome, and they will all that function will be able to be reducible to just 3 dimensions in some way. So this is an absolute drawing, but what I was saying, and the thing is that this is, though, the motion that we're looking at. Now, we're not looking at it absolutely because we're only looking at it in 2 dimensions, not in 3 dimensions. Like I said, what we know very little of is, like, say, how far the stone is from the car. Well, we know it's dropped by a person, so it can't be too far out. But still, we don't absolutely know that. And we, as much as the viewer from here is unable to determine just from the rock alone this movement, the fact that he's moving, and therefore that, and say without the knowledge of the ground below somehow, if it was dark or obscured in some way, you couldn't tell that there was motion there. The ignorance of it's as if the perspective, the thing that makes the person unique, blinds it from seeing, or that makes this perception unique, is the very thing that blinds the person from seeing the other things that are happening. Out here, on the embankment, we don't have an absolute view. We still have a perspective, but we're far enough away to see the perspective, actually, of it can be exactly what blinds us. And yet, even from this perspective, with enough information implied by, one, the velocity change, in other words, the acceleration of the object, if there was a way of quantifying that, over repeated drops, one might be able to infer the pattern, the numerical pattern. And you could also get the change rate of the ground, because the ground would appear to be traveling this way if you were here. If you were uncertain who was moving, you would be able to, by some means, especially if you were able to see the railroad ties from where you were, you could, with a clock, you could sort out exactly what your velocity was, at least in a kind of unit, the unit of in how many of these, and then compare that to seconds, say. So you could have a quantification, and from those two datum, you could infer this is what's happening. So in other words, the event in space and time, the material event in space and time, is a thing in itself. And we can see it from different vantages. So if that's the path of the stone, it is taking place in 3 dimensions. So there's another dimension, there's another dimension, and here's our stone. Here's our stone. It is going to fall here at intervals that are exponential in their progression, but it's also going to be traveling along this line. We'll make it this line. We'll make it this line. So it's also going to be traveling along this line. So in doing so, it's going to be dropping these rocks and so we see that the line is going to continue in 3 dimensions. And depending on which way you're going to... Well, there was a mercy in that horrible drawing. It's disappeared. And I won't try to do that again. I was really hoping I was going to be able to use this tablet for teaching that way, and it's not looking hopeful. But you get the idea that this is a spatial drawing. The train is some distance back from it. Everything's in... this is not a spatial drawing. The true space has dimension running backwards and forwards. So there's all these different distances, and yet there's an absolute, or these different vantages in which you can see it from. But that's only because it is an event in material space and time that follows this path. It is true that it describes an arc. You may not be able to find any vantage of which you will see it. In fact, you cannot. You cannot find a vantage from which you can see it perfectly, because you as an observing being have issues of perspective. As we saw here, the very virtue of this point of observation is the cause of its holder's blindness to the situation. Whereas out here, we're a third party. Now things have changed. We can get an overall view. Is it a perfect view? No, there's no such thing. We've just said that. But you can, if you really, for whatever reason, needed to know just what locations in space and time this object were to land in. And there's times in life when you want to know exactly that. Firing missiles, say, or any other kind of time when you're using a projectile. You want to have a very accurate notion in time and space where an object is, at least in the general sense. And in this case, sometimes maybe in the particular sense. Maybe there was a sign here, and you wanted to, you're some kid, and you wanted to throw your rock over the sign. Or, there could be somebody standing here, and you didn't see them, and you let the rock go, and you actually didn't clock them in the head. And now you're not going to have a lawsuit. So there's all kinds of reasons why actual space and time matter to people, because we're beings of free will in space and time. So the absoluteness of it, though, is the source of the perspective. I don't know how to make that plural. Perspectival? Not plural. An adjective. The perspectival? Anyway, there we are. I said it. The perspectival. The I don't think that's the word. Anyway, the view, the inherent issue of perspective for each and every point of observation, which brings me to the other point that I wanted to talk about. But let me finish this first. For each and every observation is only a limited point of perspective against all possible points of view of the thing. If you could see an object from all points of view, you would know exactly where it is occupied in space and time in terms of distance from markers, center of Earth, distance between the train and the stone at given times, so forth. So, but the other thing is that I didn't make clear in the other video that Einstein's error is he talks about his blunder again in this case is he talks about inertial frames of reference, which I prefer to call inertial contexts, because in his understanding, it's basically any time you are anywhere, there is an inertial frame of reference. Well, there's a perspectival frame of reference. And from that given perspective, you have a fixed sense in which you can. It's only because the object actually is something occupying a fixed time and space in an absolute sense that, so, it is only because there is an object truly in time and space occupying it in this particular way, which we can understand quite clearly from this image without any real big stretch to understand what's happening. I mean, we've thrown rocks, we know what it means. It's not that deeply mysterious. We have had this experience, although it is always deeply mysterious. We should never lose our sense of wonder at creation and begin to engage in this, Saganite material miserablism, which he does. The whole, and these, Dawkins. I mean, I call myself teleologic Jones. That's kind of a funny thing to me. It's as if I have a show, and it's a creationist show that rivals Bill Nye the Science Guy. that's sort of what that's riffing on. Anyway, if you're wondering who teleologic Jones is, he's out here taking the fiery darts of the wicked with his shield, and the wicked firer of darts was for a whole generation was Bill Nye the Science Guy. Okay, had a strong influence over teaching people what was materially the case and corrupted many, 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 many people. Now, they don't even know it. It's so deep in their programming. Anyway, science. We do natural philosophy here, though, at Teleologic Jones, at TJ Inc. Oh, yeah, I think I might have gotten distracted. I want to get to the difference between, so we can have these perspective. He calls them inertial reference frame. But there is no, it's a misuse of the word, and we're seeing what that leads to here. We're seeing that misuse of language, calling this man here and the train an inertial reference frame. Now, there is some truth to that, in that, all the objects of the train are moving along with the train in a context, but the context is artificial. It's never necessary outside of material cause and effect. Like if, let's imagine you're in the train here, and we'll try it again. There's a table, and it's got stuff on it. It's a bottle of wine. And there's, debris, bric-a-brac on the table. And What happens when the train starts? Well, sometimes these things fall over, they tip until they get, kind of up. So the connection, the inertial connection, we had another dropout, so we've lost our terrible drawings again. So you've all been spared them. So all of those connections are accidental, and so on any kind of bus trip, train trip, any kind of trip, the accident is you were reminded of your accidental status upon the vessel or in the thing every once in a while, but whenever it makes a turn or whatever, you are not. It's a context, but it's only by agreement and by capacity. If the utensils, if the back of the bus had no, or the train had nothing to it, it was open, and the utensils somehow were just floating in the air. When the train took off, they would stay put. They don't have any necessary connection. But you can't change this. This is often called in physics the normal force, because it's always present. Anytime you're doing any calculations on Earth about objects of Earth, you have to include this. There might be certain things that you don't, but almost always, and in many cases, it's the driving force. It's you're trying to find a way for this to do some work for you, or at least you enjoy the pleasure of it when it does, such as when you've ridden up a hill and you get to coast down it on your bicycle. So that is constant, and that is really, in terms of inertial reference frame, I won't be bold enough to try to write that here. In terms of inertial reference frames, this is the only one. The whole of the globe is the inertial reference frame. I'm actually an artist, but that's not really showing right here. So the whole of the globe is one inertial reference frame, because from some proximity out here, and in is a compulsion. It is neither pulling nor pushing, but simply something we call falling, because there's no other force on Earth that is like it. No machine can repeat it. No even natural phenomenon like magnetism can be perfectly analogous to it. In fact, magnetism is only very roughly analogous to the force that we call gravity, for the most part, which I call Earth intention. But as shown too, because the Earth is spinning, that this thing is moving as a context, like this, around and around and around, is a fixed inertial reference frame. This is the inertial reference frame. Every other inertial frame is accidental. The train is accidental. Even the parts of a human being are accidentally connected. I mean, you don't. Sometimes you notice that if you have the high G kind of, or a high velocity change, your arms can feel like they want to fall behind you. Or anyway, that's the again, we had a dropout, so we've lost our sticky drawings. So when we talk about inertial reference frames, we can talk about subordinate reference frames. We can have reference frames which are accidentally composed, such as the train. All the parts are accidentally assembled together. The motor, the pulling of it. There'd normally be a lineup of these cars, not just one, and there'd be a coupling here that would be connecting them, and then you'd have the other one here, right? And you would have an engine up ahead, or if this was the engine, it'd be tugging on this. Now, once they're moving, they if everything else around them suddenly, disappeared, they'd still move, much just exactly as our stone moves. The object at motion remains at motion unless enacted upon by an outside force. So the wind, the air resistance obviously slows it a bit. If there was a gale of a wind blowing, that would actually could actually end up effectively in the inverse side of this, but depending on the state. But it's likely, in perfect space-time, this is the drawing. In actual existence, who knows? High wind, it might end up about here. So, and it might have even fluctuations due to gusts, but whatever. That's real conditions in real time and space with all the matter of the thing considered. Here we're looking at the most abstract thing. So in terms of the actual event, well, that has to include all variables, conditions, in every location according to some grid of location. But we just be, the object at motion remains at motion, and that's what's happening here until, boom, it hits the ground. Now it's enacted upon by an outside force. And this lateral velocity is unaffected by, this velocity here, whatever in any projectile, any velocity this way, is in no way inhibited by the downward gravitational force. I don't mean by inhibited, I mean it's in no way modified by it. It's always going to be, if this is one unit per 1t per d, well then this is, I think, 24 units of t per d, and they're all the same distance apart this way. But this side has an acceleration, so it's increasing in speed, and that's why we have the curve. So this motion is far more complex, and I have done. I'm just about finishing a book on Earth intention. In the Restoration, there is a long geometric discussion of exactly this graph. This is the unit fall graph, basically, from my theory of Earth intention. I don't even like saying that. It's just a description of the world as created. It's not. I'm not trying to even make a name for myself particularly. I mean, of course, a person might be proud of work they do, but it's not. And it's wrong to see these things the way we have been seeing them, as physical things. It's not a physical thing. It's a metaphysical will. If you look at this here, and I'm not going to make the full defense right now, but if you look at this here, just the straight line falling of an object, which is a thing that happens often. They also happen like this when they're projectiles. This is even a projectile. It's just a projectile with 0 for lateral velocity. So there's the simple progression of a falling object, that there is nothing, as I said before, in nature or in physical forces that is analogous to this. You can have things accelerate, of course. You add more gas, you speed up. But you cannot, first of all, ever do it at this kind of continuous state. Magnetism, neither does magnetism do this. And people say, well, what about magnetism? Well, magnetism doesn't do this like this, because magnetism is truly affected by distance. The closer the two attracted objects get, the faster they accelerate. In other words, acceleration increases as distance decreases. The closer it gets, the faster they come together. That's the simplicity of it. But from this, instead, we have a constant addition of a distance unit that never changes. It's always the same amount added. And so even though the object speeds up, the rate of change is actually less each interval, which means the current velocity at any location, by the time you get to the next location, it had less of a rate of change per unit, but it still had an increase of rate of change. So acceleration is infinite until in the physical world you reach terminal velocity. But mathematically and in a vacuum, and also without a location, because it's actually impossible to reach the center infinitely, because there's a center, there is a location. This isn't just or at least so it seems, but it's hard to know. The intention by which objects move is exceedingly mysterious, and this is borne out in the current orthodoxy and their constant admission, and quite rightly so. They have no idea what gravity is. Well, I think we can know from whence it comes, even if we can't know what it is. We know it by its effects, not by its affect. We don't know it in itself. We know it by its movement of objects. And we understand what it's doing here in a way, even though it's speeding up, and that's a bit mysterious, but we understand, but we can make things move too. We can, throw things at a velocity. If we were really fancy, we could even make them kind of accelerate, at least for some portion of the fall, such that the closer we got to matching this acceleration to this acceleration, if we could do such a thing, it would, that's not exactly 45 degrees, but you get it. If we could get a whirligig on the stone and make it go this way, we could get the object to accelerate along this line. It would be accelerating equally both ways. Whereas here, because of the constant velocity this way against so if we were to be able to pull off this acceleration this way and this way, we could have that. And if it was a little slower, the line would vary according to the variable. If we were to just simply throw it at a faster constant rate, all we will be doing is stretching out the arc. It'll go out further and further. These are not great examples of the shape, but you get the idea. It would go further. And those are all accidents. Even the accelerating one is an accident because it's an artificial condition. Now, this may be considered artificial. It's divinely artificial, though. It's constantly present. It's always there. And it does define the space in an absolute sense. So this force behind the material reality, which is not something that seems to be in any way inherent in matter as matter, like the Newtonian theory assumes, because every object of any size, I can be dropping things, much bigger things, it's going to have the same rate of fall. I could be dropping tiny, tiny little things. I can get it to do tiny. I can drop things of any size. There we go. Of any size, and I will get the same rate of fall for any size object. All of these things dropped at the same time will hit here at the same time. They will accelerate at the same rate. So objects are being moved towards Earth regardless of their mass, not because of their mass, regardless of their mass. That's the most simply observable fact of the organizing principle of Earth, which is often called gravity. It's the Earth's formal and also we'd have to say efficient cause together. It is the divine will that causes things to come together. This thing that this idea that we find the answer to this question and all of these questions in matter itself is a fundamental error that we have been living under for a long time. It is just simply wrong. It's not just wrong, it's damnably wrong. And I make no accusation to anyone other than to myself. I lived in that world for a long time, like we have. We've grown accustomed to thinking that because we're doing mere material investigation, we will find the answers within nature. We cannot find the answers within nature. Not if God, because God. If we are people of faith, we start with because God, not if God. We will not be rewarded if we continue to use this kind of language. And we are so apologetic about the material world that we have given over to the scientists. They've lost the game. Genetics pulls the rug out from underneath them. The whole idea of evolution and with current genetic knowledge is ridiculous. It only carries on because of inertia and the stubborn hearts of men. And that people in the church are still doing it, and not only doing it, but transforming church policy based on it. That's what we have here with Francis. We have church policy being made based on evolutionary theology. That's where we are now. That is all you need for apostasy and proof of apostasy. And that will be the last of these videos. I've done enough work on the Einsteinian blunder and spin-off ideas. I've given, I guess, sort of a rough idea about how I approach my work. I think it's thorough. I would greatly appreciate any critiques, both particular and general, in terms of any of my methodology is wrong. Am I utterly blind to something that I haven't seen? It seems to me that I've just simply taken a very straightforward approach to questions that are sometimes treated as too mysterious to comprehend. And in a sense, I found that's true, but for a very different reason than what is typically the case when it's sort of hidden behind a Gnostic veil of mathematics. And there's math there. We haven't gotten to any formulae yet, but I think that's good for these first videos on this, because it's often a barrier for a great number of people to consider. I mean, these concepts are abstract enough, but without the burden of having to use formulas that do, in fact, alienate a lot of people from being able to partake. So I hope that this has been visual and abstract enough to lay out at least the basic concepts for a broad audience. Teleologic Jones out. I wasn't losing it. I'm being gaslit by my technology. All the young kids shouted out, "Pick it up, boomer."